Martin and Evelyn Rhodes had been married for 36 years, built a quiet life in the suburbs, and earned the respect of everyone who knew them until a single envelope arrived revealing Evelyn's darkest secret and turning Martin from a devoted husband into a killer. Martin and Evelyn Rhodes had a life that most people dreamed of. They lived in a neat, two-story house on a quiet street in Charleston, South Carolina. Their garden always looked beautiful, with bright flowers in the spring and golden leaves in the fall. They still went on walks in the evening, still celebrated their anniversary with a fancy dinner every year, still remembered the small things that mattered. Whenever someone asked where she grew up or what her family was like, she gave short answers. Once, early in their marriage, Martin remembered waking up in the middle of the night and finding Evelyn sitting in the dark living room, staring blankly at the wall. When he asked what was wrong, she simply said she couldn't sleep. Another time, a man had come to the door asking for a woman named Lena. Evelyn said he had the wrong address and shut the door quickly, her hands trembling slightly. To him, she had always been the same woman who loved chamomile tea, knitted blankets in the winter, and cried during nature documentaries. Her world was small, calm, and safe. But hidden beneath that calmness was something he had never seen. A letter, a photograph, a name. That's all it would take to crack open the world Martin thought he understood. All it would take to show him that the person he had loved for 36 years wasn't the person he thought she was. Something that, when finally uncovered, would turn his world upside down. Martin had asked about it, but she brushed it off. He had lived a good life with a faithful partner by his side. They had grown older together, faced the small battles of life and survived them. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across their living room. It looked like any other evening in their peaceful life, but the past was already moving toward them, silent and unstoppable. And soon, nothing would ever be the same again. The idea that Evelyn could be anyone other than who she claimed to be never crossed his mind. She said she moved around a lot as a child and had lost contact with her parents. Most people didn't press her for more. Martin never thought much about it either. He trusted her. They had built an entire life together, raised children, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. But some people carry whole other lives inside them, carefully folded away like old photographs in the back of a drawer. Evelyn's past had stayed quiet for decades, like a secret asleep. She had worked hard to keep it that way, changing her name, building a new identity, marrying a good man who asked no difficult questions. Whatever happened before they met didn't seem important anymore. Martin liked how Evelyn always put a mint on his pillow before bed. Evelyn liked how Martin rubbed her back when she got cold. It was the kind of quiet, simple love that many only saw in movies. He focused instead on their life together, the shared meals, the vacations, the grandchildren they now visited every few months. Breakfast at 7, coffee on the porch, a walk around the block. Sometimes Martin would help a neighbor fix a fence, while Evelyn baked cookies for the church fundraiser. At night, they watched old movies or read books in comfortable silence. It was a life built slowly, layer by layer, with trust and shared effort. He never imagined there could be a part of Evelyn he didn't know, a version of her that she had hidden away. If anything troubled her in the past, Martin believed she had moved on. She was kind, generous, and thoughtful. That was all that mattered. Martin mowed the lawn every Saturday morning while Evelyn tended to her roses. Martin spent his time reading history books or fixing up things around the house. Evelyn volunteered at the local food bank and took part in a community garden project. They had friends, routines, and comfort. From the outside, nothing seemed off. They were exactly who they claimed to be: ordinary, dependable, loving. Their neighbors often waved from driveways and front porches, smiling at the couple who seemed to have everything figured out. No loud arguments, no unusual behavior, just a husband and wife growing old together in peace. They had been married for 36 years. They met in their late 20s and married after only 6 months of dating. It was fast, but their bond felt strong and genuine. Martin worked as a high school math teacher, the kind that students actually liked. He was calm, fair, and always had a quiet sense of humor. Evelyn had been a nurse but left her job early to raise their 2 children, Brian and Melissa. The kids had long since grown up and moved away, starting their own lives in different states. Holidays were when the house came alive with laughter, food, and the smell of Evelyn's homemade pies. The rest of the year, it was just the two of them. People often said Martin and Evelyn were the kind of couple others could learn from. Retirement had made their lives even more peaceful. But Evelyn had a way of dodging questions about her early life. Still, there were a few moments over the years that had felt odd. The memories were brief and scattered, small enough to ignore, and so he did. They spent their days in a quiet rhythm. But peace has a way of making people forget that life is fragile. That even the most solid-looking house can have cracks underneath. Martin had no reason to suspect anything. No calls from strangers, no strange mail, no evidence of anything unusual. He trusted Evelyn completely. In those long, quiet days before everything fell apart, Martin believed he was one of the lucky ones. But life has a strange way of revealing the truth. It waits until everything feels settled, until routines feel permanent, and then it strikes. For now, though, Martin sat in his favorite chair by the window, reading a book while Evelyn hummed softly in the kitchen. The envelope was plain, no return address, no markings except for their home address written neatly in blue ink. Martin found it mixed in with the usual pile of bills and store flyers. He might have thrown it away without a second thought, but something about the handwriting made him pause. It looked old-fashioned, careful, almost too formal. Curious, he opened it at the kitchen table with his coffee growing cold beside him. Inside were two things, a small, faded photograph and a newspaper clipping that smelled faintly of mildew. The photo showed a young woman standing next to an old car. She wore flared jeans and a striped shirt, her hair long and feathered in a 1980s style. But it wasn't the setting that struck Martin, it was the face. The woman in the photo looked exactly like Evelyn, not similar. Identical. Martin stared at the image for a long time, feeling something twist in his chest. The resemblance was uncanny. The same jawline, the same small gap between the front teeth, even the way she held her shoulders. He turned to the newspaper clipping next. It was dated March 3, 1985. The headline read, "Man dies in suspicious house, fire girlfriend missing." The story described a fire in a small Ohio town. A man named Travis Holt had died in the blaze, his body discovered in the charred remains of a house that had gone up in flames late at night. Firefighters said the fire appeared to have started in the kitchen, possibly from a gas leak, but foul play hadn't been ruled out. The most shocking detail, however, was the disappearance of Holt's live-in girlfriend, Lena Carter. Authorities were unable to locate her. Neighbors claimed she vanished the night of the fire and hadn't been seen since. Martin read the clipping again. Then again, the name Lena Carter meant nothing to him. But the photograph said otherwise. It couldn't be a coincidence. Could it? At first he tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was someone else entirely. Maybe it was just a prank or a mistake. But the more he looked at the picture, the less he could deny it. He took the envelope, the photo, and the article to his study and began digging. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, Martin spent hours on his computer. He searched archives, forums, old newspaper databases. He learned more about Travis Holt, a man in his 30s with a history of domestic violence. Police reports showed that he had been arrested multiple times, most recently just weeks before the fire. Lena Carter, his girlfriend at the time, had filed for a restraining order. She had also told a coworker that she was afraid for her life. Then, just like that, the fire happened and Lena disappeared. Martin found online threads speculating about the case. Some believed Lena had died in the fire, but her body had never been found. Others thought she had set the fire herself and run away. One poster mentioned that the case had gone cold, no leads. No charges, no closure. Martin couldn't stop thinking about it. He dug deeper, this time into Evelyn's past. She had told him they met when she moved to Georgia in 1986. Before that, she claimed she had lived briefly in Florida. But when Martin tried to trace records of Evelyn White from before 1986, he came up empty. No tax filings, no credit history, no property rental agreements, nothing before that year. It was like she had appeared out of thin air. That's when he started comparing timelines. The fire happened in 1985. Lena Carter vanished. Evelyn White appeared in Georgia in 1986 and soon met Martin. The gaps matched too closely. The age, the appearance, even the silence about family and upbringing, it all added up in a way that made Martin's stomach turn. He printed out copies of everything he found: pictures, news articles, scanned court records. He stacked them in a folder and placed it in his desk drawer, locking it when Evelyn walked into the room. He began watching her differently. Not with suspicion, but with a cautious distance. Every gesture, every smile, every word now seemed loaded with double meaning. She didn't seem to notice. She still made tea in the afternoons, still folded the laundry into perfect squares, still kissed him on the cheek before bed. But to Martin, the mask had begun to slip. He started wondering about all the time she had dodged questions, all the stories that never quite added up. Once, he found her staring out the window in the middle of the night again. He stood in the hallway, watching her silhouette bathed in moonlight, still and tense, like someone waiting for something that never came. Martin wasn't sure what he wanted to believe. Maybe she had run from an abusive relationship and simply tried to start over. Maybe she had committed a terrible crime and spent decades hiding the truth. The questions grew louder with each passing day, echoing through his mind like footsteps in an empty house. Who was his wife, really? What else had she kept from him? And why, after all these years, had someone decided to send that letter? He started checking the mail himself every morning, looking for more clues. None came, but the silence didn't comfort him. It only made the mystery feel deeper, more deliberate. Someone had gone to the trouble of finding him, of sending that envelope. Whoever it was, they knew something. And they wanted Martin to know it too. He thought about confronting Evelyn. The thought crossed his mind more than once. But every time he tried to imagine the words, they got caught in his throat. What if he was wrong? What if this really was a mistake? But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Too many pieces fit too well. He had lived with this woman for 36 years, and yet now he felt as if he barely knew her. The house felt different now, the walls closer, the air heavier. Trust, once so solid, had turned into something brittle and sharp. He didn't sleep well anymore. He stayed up late, staring at his folder of papers, trying to make sense of a life that had suddenly become a puzzle. The letter had done more than raise questions. It had opened a door Martin didn't know existed. And once that door opened, it couldn't be closed again. Something was coming, he could feel it. The past had finally found its way to their doorstep, and it wasn't finished yet. Martin no longer saw Evelyn in the same way. Every movement she made, every word she spoke felt filtered through the lens of suspicion. He tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, eating meals at the same times, pretending to be interested in the TV shows they always watched together, but inside, he was unraveling. The truth had slithered into his mind like a snake in a garden, silent and deadly. He couldn't unsee the evidence. He couldn't unlearn the name Lena Carter. He began digging deeper. The internet offered more than he expected. Small forums dedicated to unsolved crimes. Digitized archives of newspapers from all over Ohio, public court documents. He sat alone for hours in his study, combing through files and images on his computer. If Evelyn was Lena, why had she received that letter now? Who sent it? Was someone trying to expose her? Or warn him? She went to the grocery store every Tuesday morning. She called their daughter Melissa on Fridays. She hummed while folding laundry and watered the plants with a soft smile. The stub matched the time Evelyn claimed she had arrived in Georgia. But she had said she came from Florida, not Ohio. The lie was subtle, but deliberate. A change of state, a shift in details, just enough to stay hidden. She asked him if he was feeling sick. He said he was just tired. She offered to make him tea. He nodded but didn't drink it. Her concern felt real. Her affection seemed unchanged. That only made it harder. About women who ran, changed their names, started over. He read about fear, trauma, the way survivors often disappeared to survive. That knowledge didn't comfort him. It only deepened his confusion. Maybe she had run to stay alive. Maybe she had no choice. How could she act so normal, so at ease, if she was hiding something so massive? To anyone else, she looked like a peaceful, loving wife living out her golden years. Evelyn was inside, baking something that smelled sweet. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal. He glanced down at the photo again, the girl who could have been his wife, standing beside a car that was probably long gone, in a life that she had buried behind a new name. He thought about what it would mean to watch her crumble, to see the lies unravel in front of her children, her friends, her entire world. But in those quiet moments when she brought him a blanket or rubbed his shoulder, he hesitated. What if there was more to the story? What if she had truly been a victim back then? Part of him wanted to confront her, demand answers. Another part hesitated, afraid of what she might say. What if she admitted to killing Travis Holt? What if she denied everything and turned the blame on him? He felt trapped in a house that no longer felt like his own. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. If she saw the face of the man who died, it was alive in his hands and his mind and every breath he took. And no matter how tightly Evelyn smiled, no matter how warm the house felt, nothing could erase what he had uncovered. The woman he had loved for more than half his life was no longer a mystery. She was a story he couldn't stop reading, even though he feared the ending. He wondered if she felt safe now, or if she had been holding her breath for 36 years. And most of all, he couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe him? How do you say to your children that their mother might have had another identity, that she might have killed a man and disappeared? But now Martin looked for signs in her eyes, movements in her hands. Was she always this calm, or was it practiced? He went over every detail, looking for clues, but the envelope offered nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, no return address. Just a photo and a clipping that cracked open a secret he hadn't even known existed. He saved everything to a USB drive and printed backups, organizing them into labeled folders. It became an obsession. The truth felt too big to ignore now. According to investigators, a gas line behind the stove had been tampered with. The blaze started in the kitchen and spread rapidly. A few fringe theories even claimed she staged the whole thing, but nothing ever came of the investigation. The case was cold, forgotten by most, until now. Her arrival in Georgia came less than a year after the fire. She had no employment records before then, no tax filings. He checked old boxes, coat pockets, handbags. He found nothing suspicious, just family photos, receipts, a few of the kids' school drawings. Then he opened a small wooden jewelry box he had never seen her use. Inside, beneath a pair of pearl earrings, was a folded paper. It was an old bus ticket stub dated March 1986. The route? Cincinnati to Atlanta. No name, just the stamp. A one-way ticket. She used the name Evelyn White on her first official document in Georgia, rental agreement for a small apartment near Augusta. Not long after, she met Martin at a church picnic. She told him she had moved from Florida. He never questioned it. Why would he? Firefighters found Travis's body in the living room. The front door had been unlocked, and there were no signs of forced entry. But Lena was gone. Her car wasn't there. Her clothes and personal belongings were missing. She had simply vanished. He pieced together a fuller picture of Lena's life before she vanished. She had worked as a waitress at a roadside diner. She had no close family, only a brother who died young and an absent father who had disappeared decades before. Her relationship with Travis Holt had been toxic. Police had been called multiple times to their residence. There was one disturbing report where a neighbor claimed to have seen Travis dragging her by the arm, shouting at her in the front yard. Still, no charges stuck. Lena stayed. Until she didn't. The fire that killed Travis Holt occurred at 3 a.m. Some believe she died in the fire and was reduced to ash. Others believe she ran either out of fear or guilt. Martin matched the timeline with Evelyn's carefully rehearsed past. Now, with every document he uncovered, Martin saw a pattern, a carefully constructed lie that had lasted for decades. Still, something gnawed at him. He started watching Evelyn more closely. She hadn't changed her behavior at all. One night, Martin went through her closet while she was in the bath. He put everything back exactly as he found it, but his heart pounded as he walked back to the living room. Martin didn't know what to do with the truth. Days passed, then weeks. The weight of the truth pressed down on Martin's chest like a stone. He became quiet, withdrawn. Evelyn noticed. Martin began to fantasize about justice not through the courts, but in his own hands. He imagined exposing her, forcing her to confess. He started reading more about abuse victims, but that didn't change what she had done. The lies, the cover-up, the silence for 36 years. That wasn't nothing. Martin sat on the porch one afternoon, staring at the street, the folder of documents heavy in his lap. He wondered if she ever thought about it. If she woke up at night remembering flames and sirens, Martin hadn't decided what he would do yet. But he knew one thing for sure: the truth was out. Martin woke up with a sense of dread he couldn't explain. The morning sun filtered through the bedroom curtains like any other day, warm and golden, but something felt off. His thoughts were cluttered, heavy from another sleepless night. The questions about Evelyn were no longer silent doubts. They had grown teeth. The why gnawed at his sanity every minute he was around her. His love, once as natural as breathing, now felt like a costume he wore to avoid asking the one question that terrified him: who was the woman lying next to him every night? He moved through the day like a ghost, observing rather than living. He watched Evelyn as she made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast with her usual quiet grace. She hummed to herself as she stirred the pan, just as she had for decades. But Martin no longer heard music in her hum. It sounded like a cover, a distraction. She asked him about the weekend plans, and he nodded without really hearing her. His eyes kept drifting to her hands. Those hands had held him. Those hands had held their children. But now he wondered what else they had done. The folder remained locked in his study drawer, but the contents were etched into his memory. The picture, the article, the timeline, the ticket stub, they formed a truth that refused to stay buried. Every moment with Evelyn now felt like acting in a play he didn't audition for. He pretended to be the loving husband, the peaceful retiree, but inside he was falling apart. By late afternoon, the tension in Martin's chest became unbearable. He couldn't sit still. He paced the hallway, rubbed his temples, looked at old photos on the wall with a sense of betrayal. The smiling woman in their wedding picture looked like a stranger. The photo of Evelyn holding baby Brian in the hospital room now felt like evidence from a case he couldn't solve. Evelyn was in the living room knitting when Martin finally snapped. Not in a loud or violent way, more like something inside him gave out. He went to the study, unlocked the drawer, and pulled out the folder. For a moment he just stared at it, hands trembling. Then he carried it into the living room and dropped it on the coffee table with a heavy thud. Evelyn looked up, puzzled at first. Then her eyes fell on the folder. She didn't say anything. She just stopped knitting. Her fingers paused mid-loop, frozen in the air. The room went still. Martin stood across from her, his breathing shallow, chest tight. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Evelyn slowly reached for the folder, opened it, and saw everything. The photo of Lena Carter. The article about Travis Holt, the court records, the bus ticket stub. She flipped through the pages with slow, deliberate movements. Her face changed as she read, subtle, but noticeable, a tightness around the eyes, a stiffness in her jaw. When she looked back at Martin, the silence between them felt heavier than any words could carry. And in that silence, something inside Martin cracked. He had imagined this moment for weeks. He had pictured her denying it, lying again, maybe even crying. But now, seeing her calm, almost resigned reaction, something darker took hold. Rage not loud or explosive, but cold and hard-filled, the hollow space left by years of love and trust. It wasn't just about the lies. It was the life they had built together, the years he had spent beside someone he thought he knew. It was the idea that she could live every day in comfort while he stumbled through the ruins of their shared past. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Martin stepped forward. Evelyn rose to her feet slowly, carefully, like someone sensing danger. There was no shouting, no argument, just the sound of Martin's heartbeat roaring in his ears. And then, in a flash of motion he couldn't later remember in detail, his hands were around her. The world narrowed into chaos. It didn't take long. It never does when anger has been building for weeks, when love has soured into something violent and unrecognizable. When it was over, Evelyn lay motionless on the floor. Her knitting needles had rolled under the coffee table. The folder was still open, one of the papers fluttering slightly from the breeze of the ceiling fan. Martin stood over her, chest heaving, staring at what he had done. Time seemed to stretch and twist, bending around his guilt like heat on pavement. He didn't move. He couldn't. He simply stared down at the woman he had once adored, the woman who had shared his bed, his life, his family. And now he stared at her like she was a stranger again, A name in a news story. A ghost from a past she had never truly escaped. The house was completely silent. Outside, the world carried on as usual. A dog barked in the distance. A lawnmower buzzed somewhere down the street. But inside that house, time had stopped. Martin didn't run. He didn't try to stage a scene or hide the truth. There was no point. The truth had already arrived, and it had destroyed everything in its path. He walked slowly to the phone, his fingers numb as he dialed. He gave his name, his address, and told the dispatcher exactly what had happened. When the police arrived, they found Martin sitting calmly on the couch, hands folded in his lap. The folder was still on the table, the evidence untouched. The body of Evelyn Rhodes lay nearby, peaceful in stillness, the years of secrets and silence finally at rest. One officer asked Martin why he did it. He didn't answer. There was no single reason, no neat explanation that could fit into a report. It was a lifetime of love turned upside down by a truth he couldn't carry. It was the weight of betrayal from someone he trusted with every fiber of his being. It was the silence of 36 years unraveling in the span of minutes. As they let him out of the house in handcuffs, Martin didn't cry, he didn't beg. He looked up at the sky, watched a cloud drift across the sun, and felt strangely empty. Everything he had known, everything he had believed, was gone. The woman he had loved wasn't who he thought she was. And now, neither was he. The news spread quickly. A well-liked retired teacher had murdered his wife of 36 years in their suburban home. There was no point contesting the facts he had confessed, stayed at the scene, and never once tried to excuse what he had done. His lawyer presented the folders of evidence as context rather than defense, arguing that Martin had suffered a psychological break brought on by the sudden unraveling of decades of trust. The judge listened quietly as details of Evelyn's past were laid out carefully, respectfully, but unavoidably. The story was too shocking for the small community of Charleston to ignore. After fleeing an abusive relationship, she had disappeared following a fatal house fire that killed her boyfriend, Travis Holt. Though no charges had ever been filed against her, suspicion had lingered for years. The envelope, plain, investigators couldn't trace it. At least, not one worthy of the punishment she received at the hands of the man she trusted most. The origin of the message that destroyed a quiet life remained a mystery. Whether it came from someone with knowledge of Lena's past, or merely a cruel stranger who stumbled across an old article and decided to interfere, no one could say for sure. The weight of what he had done hung over him like a shadow he could never step out of. Whatever justification he had constructed in the haze of anger had vanished the moment he saw her body on the floor. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had destroyed her, and in doing so had destroyed himself. Police now reopened the case, combing through old files and witness statements, hoping to finally understand what had happened the night of that fire. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing only a name, Lena Carter. And the truth, whatever shape it had originally taken, was now just another thread in a tangled web of what-ifs and regrets. And beneath it, a date and time from 1985, the same night as the fire. The neighbors never looked at it the same way again. Some avoided walking past it altogether. Others peered through the windows, curious about the place where something so unthinkable had happened. The new owners, when they finally moved in, repainted every wall, tore up the carpet, and replaced every piece of furniture. But the memory of what had taken place there lingered. Tragedy has a way of seeping into the bones of a place. Attached was a copy of a police tip submitted anonymously back then, describing a woman matching Lena's description leaving town on foot hours before the fire started. The tip had never been followed up. The name of the person who submitted it was redacted. There were no cheers or protests. Only silence, thick and suffocating. Neighbors stood behind yellow tape, their faces etched with disbelief, as police officers moved in and out of the Rhodes house collecting evidence. It became another cautionary tale, occasionally mentioned in podcasts or local true crime blogs, the loving husband who snapped when faced with a secret too large to bear. He spent most of his time alone, reading old books and staring at the walls, and what did they hope to accomplish? He would never know. That mystery remained locked in time, just like the woman he had loved and lost and destroyed. He never spoke much to the other inmates, never caused trouble. He was just another man among many, swallowed by a system that saw him only as a number in the file. But deep inside, Martin carried the weight of his choices every waking moment. A man transformed by betrayal or perhaps by his own inability to understand the woman he loved. They had flown in from their homes, shaken to the core by what had happened. A silence that stretched across the years they had spent together. A silence that echoed louder than words in the hearts of everyone left behind. Melissa spoke with tears running down her cheeks, saying her mother had been her best friend, her protector. Brian struggled through his words, unable to reconcile the man who taught him how to ride a bike with the man who had taken their mother's life. Martin Rhodes, the quiet man who always waved from his porch and helped shovel driveways in the winter, now sat in a county jail cell charged with second-degree murder. The court proceedings began within weeks. Martin waived his right to a trial by jury. The woman known as Evelyn Rhodes had indeed been born Lena Carter in a small Ohio town. He received no visitors. His children, devastated and angry, cut off all contact. They didn't want to hear explanations. They didn't want apologies. For them, there was nothing left to salvage. But what they found surprised even the seasoned detectives. Further forensic analysis of the original case revealed that the gas leak had likely been accidental. Old piping, improperly installed, had corroded over time, from fear, perhaps, from trauma. From a past she didn't believe she could survive if she stayed. She had assumed a new name, built a new life, and never looked back. Until someone forced her past to the surface. The fire's origin point, previously believed to be intentional, now appeared to have been caused by structural neglect rather than arson. Travis Holt had been drinking heavily that night, and it was likely he had passed out before the fire consumed the living room. Lena Carter Evelyn Rhodes had run, but not necessarily from guilt. That someone was never identified. The letter Martin received had no fingerprints. No DNA, the return address, fake. What they did know was this: Evelyn had committed no crime. The tragedy deepened in the courtroom. Martin sat silently as his children, Brian and Melissa, gave emotional statements. Martin didn't respond. He didn't defend himself. He simply sat with his hands folded, his eyes hollow. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Martin was moved to a state correctional facility where he spent his days in quiet isolation. Word of the case faded over time. But there was more to the story than most ever knew. A few months after the sentencing, a package arrived at the Charleston police station. The information came too late to change anything. Evelyn was dead. Martin was behind bars. Back in the house they once shared, a real estate sign stood on the lawn. In the quiet of his prison cell, Martin Rhodes aged quickly. He often thought about the letter, the one that started it all. Who had sent it? Why then? Why after 36 years? And so the story ended not with justice or understanding, but with silence.